Hello, welcome you all again to our channel. So, in previous session, we have started our chapter of NEET, one of the finest chapter of NEET, the chemical control and coordination. There we have seen the introductory part of this chemical control and coordination, where we have learned the about the endocrine system, the exocrine system, and the hormone. And if you can remember, we named this as the study of the overall. This chapter is endocrinology, where we are concerned with the study of the endocrine system and endocrine glands along with hormones. And the study is endocrinology, and a father is Thomas Edison. If you can recall, Thomas Edison is father of endocrinology. Okay, and also we have discussed about the hormone, and we have learned about hormone is that hormones are basically intercellular chemical messenger. And also after this we have seen that this is the non-nutritive and produced in trace amount. Okay, so if you can remember, these three are the major property of this hormone. And we also have seen that the endocrine gland which secrete these hormones are the ductless gland, and if it is ductless gland, pour their secretion in blood. So we have covered up this major thing. We also have learned so far that about the hormone, that the major category of hormone is the water soluble and lipid soluble. For water soluble hormone, we have seen that this may be either amine derivative, that is amino acid derivative, and protein or peptide nature. Okay, for lipid soluble hormone, we have seen that this may be a steroidal hormone, and maybe thyroid hormone. And we also have discussed about the examples, like for thyroid hormone we have thyroxine. For a steroid from male, it is testosterone. In female, it is either estrogen and progesterone. And in common, we have glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. For amine, an amino acid derivative, we have seen about epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? For protein and peptide, we have seen hormone from pituitary, like it is growth hormone, if it is LH, FSH, prolactin, yes, ACTH, TSH, and also we have oxytocin and ADH. So these are major hormones we have to cover up throughout this topic. So all these things we have covered up in our previous lecture, where we have seen the nature of hormone, that the hormones can be butter soluble like amine, protein. These two major category of hormones are butter soluble, but the steroidal hormone and thyroid hormone are the lipid soluble, that is, they can't be dissolved in water. So now let me tell a point, that these hormones are secreted from the cell A, okay, and after secretion from the cell, this is the source, it has to reach its target B, okay. So after secretion from source cell A, it has to reach cell B. So it will reach to cell B. Cell B is target. So how will this influence the activity, the physiology of cell B? For that, cell B, what will it do there? So we know that for any cell, the cell membrane is basically composed of the lipid bilayer membrane. Okay, so this is lipid bilayer membrane. Okay, and to show the action, this hormone must go and bind with the cell, must enter in the cell, okay. So a hormone can only action if it enters the cell, and if it can go and bind with the nucleus. Why I am saying this? Because you know that for a cell, the for any cell, for any cell, the control center is nucleus, okay. So it is nucleus which is control center of the cell. So according to information received, nucleus can manipulate signals, nucleus can control the cell. So based on the signal, so signal must enter nucleus, signal must enter nucleus, message must enter nucleus, and based on that the cell will respond. Okay, a main point, my goal is to discuss you as this point here, that for a message, if it is a chemical messenger, hormone is chemical messenger, it must go and reach to the nucleus. But we know that the nucleus is found inside of the cell. Nucleus is found inside of the cell. Okay. So hormone must cross this lipid bilayer membrane. Now there is a trick, that we know that hormone is of two nature, that it may be butter soluble or it may be butter insoluble, okay, that is lipid soluble. And we also know that like dissolve, like dissolve like. So if a hormone is there and if it is lipid in nature, so what will it do? It will directly cross this membrane, okay. But if it is not lipid in nature, that is if it is non-lipid nature, so it will not cross the membrane. So how these two different hormones, which is either butter soluble or lipid soluble hormone, will show their action, our goal is to discuss in detail here. So let's come to the point for lipid soluble hormone. So let's come mechanism 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 of action. So let's say if it is lipid soluble hormone. So for lipid soluble hormone, can you cite example? Right over there we have written that if it is lipid soluble, it may be the testosterone, right? It may be estrogen, it may be progesterone, it may be glucocorticoids, it may be mineralocorticoids, and also it may be thyroid hormone, that is thyroxine. So for this hormone, for this lipid soluble hormone, how will these hormones show their action? So let's come to the point, and let's say this is the lipid bilayer membrane. So let's say this is the lipid bilayer membrane. So when hormone from cell A is secreted and reach to the target cell B. So when hormone from cell A is secreted and reach to the target cell B, so this is hormone. What will be there that after reaching it, since the lipid bilayer is already having the lipid constituent, so what will happen that this lipid hormone can directly cross the lipid bilayer and will reach to the nucleus here okay. So for hormone, when it will reach to the cytoplasm or to the nucleus, it will bind with its receptor. Hormone will now bind with the receptor. So where it can bind with its receptor, and the hormone will form not now the receptor hormone complex. It is RC complex. So the RH complex, receptor hormone complex. So let's again discuss. Let's say if hormone A is secreted, if it is the estrogen from cell A, that is if it is secreted, now what will happen? It will now come to the target cells. After coming, it now cross the lipid bilayer membrane. Why? Because this hormone is already the lipid in nature, and the membrane is also lipid bilayer membrane, that is the major constituent of the membrane is lipid. So according to like dissolve like principle, the lipid soluble membrane is now crossing the lipid bilayer membrane. Inside of the cell, it will bind with its receptor complex and form a receptor hormone complex. So the hormone will now form a receptor hormone complex, and then it will go and bind with the DNA. So after forming a receptor hormone complex, it will go and bond with the DNA here, and binding with DNA activate this DNA for mRNA synthesis. The mRNA will now translate it into protein. So based on the hormone, the type of hormone, the nature of hormone, the mRNA and protein synthesis is seen, translation of protein is seen, and the cellular response will seen here. So this is overall the mechanism of hormone. This is very simple, uh, not very complex mechanism that you should always remember. The like dissolve like dissolve like. So if it is lipid bilayer, and the hormone which is coming, that is either of the hormone, any of the hormone, if it is asked in your examination or wherever, if it is asked that, now let's say if it is progesterone, if someone is asking that the hormone progesterone, so where it will bind, so instantly you can see that if it is for progesterone, and if it is progesterone is a lipid soluble hormone, so it will always cross the lipid bilayer membrane, and it will bind with its receptor which is found in the inside of the membrane, that is it may be in nucleus, so there it will form a receptor hormone complex. So always and always remember, if it is the lipid soluble hormone, so you will always say that for lipid soluble hormone, the receptor found is inside of the cell, and the receptor hormone complex will always form inside of the cell, and according to the signal, according to the hormone, the cellular response is seen. Now if it is not lipid soluble hormone, that is if it is water soluble hormone, so how cellular physiology or cell response is seen? So let's say if it is water soluble hormone, so in case if it is water soluble hormone, in case if it is water soluble hormone, okay, so water soluble hormone, or simply it is lipid insoluble. Okay, so you have to if you can remember this both, or simply by logic, if you can remember that if it is water soluble, then it must be lipid insoluble, because water is polar substance and lipid is non-polar. So basic chemistry, that polar can be polar and non-polar can be polar, so polar will always dissolve in polar, and non-polar will always dissolve in non-polar. So if it is water soluble hormone, like for water soluble hormone, the example is the epinephrine, or hormones of pituitary, that is LH, FSH, GH, prolactin, ACTH, TSH, or it may be like the ADH and the oxytocin. So any of these hormone, or the hormone except the lipid soluble hormone, are all found in the category of the water soluble hormone. So if it is water soluble hormone, or if it is, also we can say that this is lipid insoluble hormone. So for lipid insoluble hormone, that it cannot dissolve in lipid, so it will not dissolve in lipid bilayer, and if it is not dissolved in lipid bilayer, that is it cannot cross this lipid membrane, bilayer membrane. So for that since this butter soluble hormone cannot cross this membrane, so there are some receptors. There are some receptors present on membrane. So the point is that for butter soluble hormone, receptors are present on membrane. Okay, so the hormone now comes and binds here, and after binding this, so this hormone comes, binds. After binding this, the conformation change. Hormone bind, hormone bind. Now what will happen? Conformation changed, and change in conformation will now leads the generation of second messenger. Why it is second messenger? Because already you have learned that the hormones are the chemical intercellular chemical messenger, that the first message service is taken care of by this hormone. So hormones are the first messenger. Okay, hormones are the first messenger. So if it is butter soluble hormone, the receptor is present on membrane. It will bind to the receptor present on membrane, and after binding with the receptor, now it will stimulate the generation of second messenger, and after stimulating the generation of second messenger, this second messenger will now go and bind in the nucleus with the DNA. So after binding with this DNA, or also it can activate some factors. We can say that it can bind with DNA, or it will activate some factor which will bind with DNA of the nucleus. And when this will bind with the DNA, it will now start synthesizing mRNA. mRNA will now synthesize protein, and based on that, the cellular response is seen. So this is overall mechanism of the butter soluble hormone. So we have covered here that if it is butter soluble hormone, the main point is that for butter soluble hormone, the receptor is present on membrane. But if it is lipid soluble hormone, the receptor will be present inside of the membrane. That the lipid soluble hormone, the lipid soluble hormone can cross directly the membrane, the bilayer membrane, and based on that, their relevant action is seen. So this is very important to know what kind of hormones are exactly butter soluble hormone and what kind of hormones are exactly butter soluble hormone, so that you can tackle the questions. Like no one is going to ask you the butter soluble hormone directly. They will ask you generally like this: mineralocorticoid hormone. So where the receptor is present for a mineralocorticoid hormone, where will be the receptors present for the uh, pituitary hormone like LH or FSH, where will be the receptor present for the thyroid hormone. So these kind of questions will be asked, and if you know that thyroid hormones are basically lipid soluble hormone, that it can directly cross the membrane and bind with the receptor present inside the membrane, that is in nucleus or cytoplasm. So in that case only, if you remember exactly the examples, then only you can tackle the situation. So this is overall about the introductory part and the mechanism part of the hormonal action. Now we'll shift to our next goal, which is the major endocrine glands and their structure and functions. Basically, the whole of this NCRT and NEET syllabus covers major portion of the hormonal physiology rather than their anatomy. So our goal is also to learn the physiological part in detail extent rather than the anatomical part. We'll cover the anatomy according to NCRT and NEET what they allow. So our next goal is to learn about the hormone major endocrine gland. Major endocrine glands of our body. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. If you enjoyed, thumbs up. We stick with our channel. We'll update you for the next major endocrine glands, and we'll also cover the uncover of NCRTs, and we'll also practice some of the MCQs which are previously asked frequently in NEET, and we'll also practice more and more number of questions. Stick with us. Thank you till date. Like, do share, subscribe our channel so that you can get the latest update. Thank you.